We're studying in a class this morning that we've been picking up with. I want you to go with me to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20 as we start this morning. We've been talking about some things that the church will face in the next 20, 30, 40 years and things that the church has already faced in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And we've been doing it in this class as a class that is filled with wisdom, as a class that's been through life in the majority, most of which children are having children of their own and maybe even grandchildren. And we've chose to put this class in this particular segment for your wisdom, that you can help with the younger generations that are coming along. You can help with those of which need to be concerned about, and you can help those who are in this life dealing with things of life. But I want you to start in Matthew chapter 20 and go to verse 28. Verse 28 reads this: "Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." We're not going to talk this morning about being a servant, but I want to use Matthew 20:28 to be a thrust for us to focus on a word this morning. I want us to focus on the word stewardship, or in other words, our activities in life and our ways of life. You know, as you think about the Lord's church, especially 1 Corinthians 12, 13 through 27, we learn this fact: every person in the Lord's church is important. I want to ask a question. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay. I didn't think you would. Now listen to this. Every person's important, and every person has something to contribute. In other words, we all have things we can do, we all have things we can say, but many times we find ourselves in a position, and sometimes it's the younger, sometimes it's the older, sometimes it's all of us. We put ourselves in a position to say, there's nothing that I can do. And I believe that's going to be one of the greatest things that hurts the church in many ways. Go with me to Matthew 25. Just turn over a few chapters. I want to introduce us to a set of men, introduce us to a man who's going to give people something to do. Now, as we introduce Matthew 25, I want to ask a very important question. Do we as the Lord's people believe God has given us something to do? Yeah. I think so. Go with me to Matthew 25:14. And I want you to notice just the first phrase of this verse so we can make the introductory remarks we need. "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country." I want you to focus on the first set of words. For the kingdom of heaven is. What is this particular scenario going to teach us? What's it going to teach us about? Is it going to teach us anything? For the kingdom of heaven is. What does that mean? Number one, it teaches us, I'm glad we started there, the kingdom of heaven exists. The kingdom of heaven is. But this particular scene is going to teach us how we behave in what? The kingdom of heaven, the church. So I believe it's a great opportunity for us to understand there are things that we can do. There are things that we need to be involved in. And in Matthew 25, we find that everyone has something he can do for the master. So verse 14 says, "Who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods." Now notice verse 15. "And one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey." What's a talent in Matthew 25? We usually look at it as an ability, but if we get to the original word, what was a talent? It was money. So here we're going to make the application to talents in just a minute. But here this master of the house, the owner of the home, comes to his 3 servants and he gives them 3 very different sums of money. One 5 talents, one 3 talents, one 1 talent. And he says this, according to his several ability. So the master of the house here, the man who owns the house, the man over the servants, notice this, he knows his servants to the point that he knows their abilities. I think that's important for us to see. And then I want you to see this. To every man according to his several ability. Now notice the next phrase. And straightway took his journey. What did he do? He gave 1 5, 1 3, 1 1. Then what did he do? He took off. He left. He left them with everything they needed. He knew they had the ability to do it. And what did he do? He trusted in them. He trusted in them. This morning's class may be about stewardship, but it's also about us recognizing that God has trusted that we will do what's right. God has trusted that we will do as we should. And I know most of you have studied this before, so I want you to go all the way down to verse 19 and read how it says, "After a long time the Lord of these servants cometh and reckoneth with them." Now I want you to block in your minds verses 16 through 18 for just a moment in your mind. Ignore that you know that. And let's ask some questions. The master of the servants, the master of the house, the owner of the home, gave 5, 3, and 1 to his servants. And he leaves, and then he comes back. What did that master expect? An increase. We're talking about financial terms, a return on his money, an increase. Did he expect it from the person that he gave 5 talents to? He expected it from all of them. So the 5, the 3, the 1, and remember, he gave this to them according to their several ability. He knew what they could do, he knew what they could not do, and therefore he placed it just as he needed to. Now, of course, we're going to put back into our minds verses 16 through 18. And we know the one who took the 5 brought back 5 other talents. He had a 50% return, or 100% you could call it. The one that had 3, you look at it, he did likewise. And he gained the other 2. Let me say 2. I'm saying 3. I'm sorry. He gave 5, 2, and 1. I had it in my mind 3. I'm sorry. The one that gave 2, he received 2 also. But notice verse 18. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Then verse 19, after a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with him, or with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I had gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee a ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. So what happened to the 5-talent man? He was rewarded. What did he do? This is a crucial question. What did the 5-talent man do? He used what the master or the father of the house gave him and fulfilled his obligations. Now, go to the 2-talent man. I'll make sure I don't say 3 again. The 2-talent man. He that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou hast delivered us unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. Notice verse 23. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. What happened to him? He was rewarded. 5-talent man brings in 5. He's rewarded. 2-talent man brings in 2 more. He's rewarded. What's the purpose being presented to us here so far? If you obey your Lord, you'll receive your reward. I think that's a plain statement that's being presented to us here. Now, what does this have to do with? What has to do with stewardship? The 5-talent man, he was given 5 talents. Now, the context of this tells us that he understood what to do with those 5 talents, didn't he? Now, did he do what he was supposed to do? Well, evidently, yes, because he gained the 5 more, and his Lord was pleased.
In other words, he doubled his money.
Well, he doubled, but here's the point. Did his Lord have to tell him, here's 5, I expect 5 more? No. Okay. Let's go to the 2-talent man. He was given 2 talents according to his several abilities. What did he bring in? 2 more. Did his Lord have to come and tell him, now you bring in 2 more. Now I expect you to double this. It's up to us to know the Father, isn't it? Same thing with these servants. Just as much as the father or the master of the house knew his servants, so must the servants know the master of the house. Let's apply this to Christianity. Does the Father know who we are? Of course. Now here's the question. Do we know who He is? I think many times that's where we struggle, is to know what we're supposed to do, to know what we're supposed to be doing. These 5-talent and 2-talent man did right, but now notice verse 24. Then takes a turn on us. He which received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee, that thou art a hard man. Press the pause button for just a minute. What does the 1-talent man say? Lord, I knew you. But here's the question. Did he tell the truth? We've not gotten into all of verse 24 yet. No. He wasn't willing to do what the master said. Keep reading the verse. Reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. Now notice verse 25. Here's the answer. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast, that is thine. The 1-talent man said, Lord, I know who you are. And you're a hard man. You're a difficult man. You're a complicated man. But notice what he says about the Lord of the house. You're a thieving man. You gather where you've not sown. You reap where you've not strawed. You're a thief, Lord. So what did he do? He hid it. What did the Lord get from this 1-talent man? He got nothing in return. But here's the reality. He got exactly what he gave him. Draws a lesson for us. Then we find the reaction, verse 26, his Lord answered and said unto him, now notice these 2 words, wicked and slothful, but notice this word, servant. Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming should I have received my own with interest. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10. What did we learn? I know we've not read farther yet, and we're going to. What have we learned?
If you don't use it, you're going to lose.
That's a very good phrase. But here's what we learn. We have a direct relationship with our value toward God. The 1-talent man still had 1 talent, didn't he? But where was the value? Was the value in the money? Is the value of this parable in the money? No, it's about the servant. But you're right, it's about what the servant does. It's about stewardship. It's about activity, it's about doing. I want us to think about 2 specific ideas this morning that will help us in what we do. Number 1, I want us to think about the stewardship of service. And to do that, I want us to go to the book of James. Go to the book of James. The book of James is often described as the manual for Christian living. If you've not read the book of James lately, go read that and you will not regret it. You will not regret it. But when you start in the book of James, you get the idea of what a Christian is supposed to be dedicated to, but you don't get the definition. We're just going to read the first 5 words. James, a servant of God. What is the Christian? He is a servant, but to whom does he belong? James, a servant of God. If you look at the word servant and look it up in its original form, it's a word that means, well, in reality, it's a word that means slave, bond servant, one who owes someone else something for a debt that had been paid. A willing servant, that's good.
We're in debt to a bank or anything, we're a servant.
There you go. Anybody ever had a bank or a house loan in here? Did you have to pay that off? Of course. You're indebted to that institution. But let's make the practical application of James 1. James, a doulos, a servant of God. He tells us what he is and to whom he belongs. Now you replace James 1:1, the first 5 words, you replace the first word with your name and you read that. A servant of God. Now what are we indebted to God for? Everything. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What's the one word we don't like to say, but it's the reason we're in the position we are? 3-letter word. Sin. What debt do we owe God? Forgiveness of sins. How was that debt paid? Now we understand. We understand the writing of James 1:1. James, a servant, a willing free servant for a debt that he cannot repay of God. The Christian is a servant. I want you to think about the life of Jesus, and do that. Go to the book of Mark. Go to Mark and go to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. So much is said about Jesus. Our Wednesday night class has been encouraged to read the book of Matthew, so we're not going to try not to read the book or use the book of Matthew this morning much. But look at what we find in Mark 10, verse 45. For the Son of Man, pause for just a minute. Who is that? For the Son of Man, Jesus. Read it this way. For even Jesus came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. Now notice this. And to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus' life was filled with ministry or servitude, service. But you see, the life of Jesus was filled with something else. He was to give his life to be a ransom for who? Us. The best way to look at that, when you read Mark 10:45, you take many away and you put me. And there's the impact that's being put down by this passage. Why did Jesus come to this earth? For us. If you look at Luke 19:10, to seek and to save that which was lost. That's the idea of Jesus. Now go to Romans chapter 1. Let's see some other individuals inside of Scripture. Romans chapter 1. And go down to verse 14. Let's ask ourselves a question of the writer of the book of Romans. Who wrote Romans? Paul. Okay. Would we suggest that Paul was a servant of Jesus Christ, a servant of God? Of course, and in many of his writings, he'll say just as James did, Paul, a servant of God. Notice Romans 1, begin at verse 14. Here's the mentality. I am a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and the unwise. And then he says this, so as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are in Rome also. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. Who was Paul? Who was he? What was his first name? Saul. Who was Saul? Well, he's a Jew, a sinner. He was a persecutor. We read about him in many occasions, especially on one of the first scenes we read about him. They laid their coats at the feet of a man named Saul. He persecuted the church. There's something we do know about Saul. He was a very educated man, very educated.
He said he's one of the chiefest of the sinners.
Yeah. I like that he's so educated he knows who he is. You know, in the age we live in, people can be overeducated, can't they? And know nothing. Yes, you're right. Paul was educated and he knew everything, didn't he? What did he know? He knew his lot, he knew his position, and he called himself the chiefest of sinners. I believe that should be the attitude of most individuals as we think about sin, as we think about life. But Saul was a man who had everything going for him in this life. The high priests, they loved him. The rulers of the synagogues, they praised him. Money wasn't a problem because he did what he needed to do. He did what he was told. When you think about the Apostle Paul, do you think about his sin? When you open up to Romans 1:1 and you read the very first word, Paul, what do you think of? Well, you think about what happens in Romans 1:1, a servant. You think of his actions. You think about what he has done. You know, Paul was willing to open his eyes, to lift up his head, and Paul went to work. The principle that we're trying to lay down in our minds is that no one should have to tell us how to live as a Christian. And I think that's a principle that we've lost. We expect to be told what to do. We expect to be told when to do it, and maybe that's because of the conditioning of our society, because that's mostly how our society lives. But we should not have to be told, such as, let's make an example, Texas. Should we be told to send funds to Texas? Yeah. We should be willing. Let's take Florida for an example. Do we all know what's coming? We've been watching it. Probably if you're like me, you check it every day just to see how it's progressed. I checked it this morning when I got up. Should we be told that we need to help those people? We should be asking, can I help? We should already be ready to help, but the question becomes, and I don't say this negatively to us, but why do we have to be told what to do? Why do we have to live in a way that we have to say, I'll do that? I think so. That's very true, but what I'm making application is not what the elders tell us what to do, but why many times do we have to wait to find something to do? Go back to the 5, 2, and 1 talent man. What happened to them? They were given their talents. Their Lord left. Who told them what to do? That's why we're looking at the principle of stewardship. The 5 talent, the 2 talent man, what did they do? They went to work. They knew what they needed to do. And it's interesting to us, the one-talent man knew what he needed to do too. But his problem was he didn't know the Lord. He didn't know the keeper of the house. And he thought ill will toward him because of that. What did he say? I know you're a hard man. You reap where you do not sow. You gather where you've not strawed. He didn't know his Lord. He didn't know his master. And many times, we fall in that position. We wait and we wait and we wait and we wait. 5 and 2 went to work. They put their hands to service. Jesus went to work. That's why he came to this earth. Paul, while on this earth, even though in the wrong in the first part of his life, what did he do? He became a person that was not ashamed to do what's right. You know, maybe it'll be the case that we need to go to Florida and help. Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we need to send funds. Maybe that's what best serves the people. Maybe we need to send supplies. Here's the question. Will we? I think there's a key there. I think that's a key that's being pulled in the idea of stewardship. If you take Jesus out of the New Testament, what would Paul look like? If you take Jesus out of the New Testament, what would Paul look like? He would look like Saul. If you take Paul out of the New Testament, what would the New Testament look like? It would be much shorter, wouldn't it? Man, you let the man go, you convert the man to Christianity, what does he do? He goes through the world. You put him in prison, what does he do? He converts the guard. You put him in prison again, what does he do? He writes half of the New Testament. Stewardship. That's really the example of stewardship. In prison, he wrote most of the letters that we read. That's time on your hands there. Now let's ask this question. What would the world look like if you took the Christians out of it? I don't think we want to know, but here's the question. Do we make a difference in our lives, or do we have to be told what to do as a child of God? And this doesn't have to deal with natural disasters. This has to do with everyday life. Jesus Christ, this was his everyday life. James, it was his everyday life. Paul, it was his everyday life. 7 days a week we have. It's a pretty good set of days, isn't it? And in those 7 days, what did God do with 7 days? In 6 days he created the world, and on the seventh he rested. 7 days, what do we do with them? Do we live 7 days as a child of God? Let's look at it this way. We need to be stewards of time. Stewards of time. And I want to ploy back to Matthew 25 just for a moment in our minds, and I want to talk about the 5-talent and 2-talent man. They gave